Helen Parker sat in her car outside the grand ballroom, the ivory envelope trembling in her hand. She'd almost tossed it in the trash when the heavy card arrived, no return address, just her name in elegant calligraphy. It was a wedding invitation from Michael Grant, the man who walked out on her 6 years ago, the man she thought she'd loved. Michael had vanished in the night after she lost their baby, leaving only a note and a shattered life in his wake. Now, with gold foil lettering spelling out "Together Forever." He was announcing his new beginning and erasing her from his story. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she recalled every lonely morning she woke to an empty bed, every birthday card that bounced back unopened, every tear she swallowed so her daughter, Emily, wouldn't see a broken mother. She could almost hear the soft click of champagne glasses, the laughter of strangers toasted to his happiness with someone else. For a moment, Helen considered staying away, letting Michael believe she no longer existed. But then Emily's steady voice echoed in her mind, "Mom, go. Not for him, for you." That single piece of wisdom, spoken by a 16-year-old who'd known abandonment far too young, jolted Helen into action. She straightened her shoulders, inhaled a deep breath of the crisp evening air, and tucked the invitation into her purse. It wasn't a summons to nostalgia or regret. It was an opportunity for Michael to witness the strength he thought he destroyed, and Helen Parker was determined to show up. Encouraged by her 16-year-old daughter Emily's unwavering faith in her, Helen Parker found herself clutching the ivory invitation as though it were a lifeline. For a moment, she considered leaving it unopened, tucked away on the kitchen counter like an unwelcome reminder of a life she'd tried desperately to forget. But Emily's voice, steady, insistent, echoed in her mind, "Mom, you should go. Not for him, but for you." That single piece of advice, spoken with the clarity of someone who has weathered hardship before her years, became Helen's guiding light. She remembered all the lonely mornings waking to an empty bed, the ache in her heart when birthday cards she'd sent to Michael Grant came back stamped "Return to sender," and the nights spent quietly packing Emily's lunch while trying to hold back her own tears. Through it all, Emily, the little girl who once clung to her hand and called her mommy, had never given up. If Emily could keep going, surely Helen could face one evening in a gilded ballroom. The decision to attend wasn't born of hope that Michael would take her back. It wasn't about rekindling old feelings or reclaiming what was lost. It was about standing tall in her own right and giving Michael a chance to witness the strength he thought he had destroyed. 6 years ago, after the devastating loss of their unborn child, Michael packed a duffel bag and left in the dead of night, leaving Helen with nothing but a note and a shattered dream. He didn't look back, and he didn't call, just vanished, taking with him any sense of security Helen had ever known. Yet in the years that followed, Helen rebuilt her life one brick at a time. She took on freelance graphic design projects, moved them into a cozy apartment closer to Emily's school, and found laughter creeping back into her days, quiet chuckles that felt foreign at first, but eventually turned into genuine belly laughs. Emily, resilient as ever, thrived under her mother's care, blossoming into a confident young woman whose compassion and wisdom far surpassed her age. Watching Emily grow, Helen realized that her daughter's perspective was a gift, a reminder that love and perseverance could conquer even the deepest wounds. So, on the evening of the wedding, Helen and Emily slipped into the back seat of Uncle Jack's car, Jack being the brother of Helen's late father. and one of the few people who had never cared for Michael's smug charm. The night air was crisp, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine from nearby gardens. Helen smoothed the front of her dark blue dress, the same one she had reserved for special occasions, and tucked a stray strand of gray-tipped hair behind her ear. She felt a flutter of nerves, but beneath it was a quiet resolve she would walk in not as the jilted ex-fiancée, but as the woman who had survived. Emily squeezed her mother's hand and offered a reassuring smile. "You're doing this for you," she whispered. Helen nodded, swallowing hard. It was true, tonight was her moment to show herself and Michael just how far she'd come. She stepped out into the foyer of the Ridgewood Grand Hotel, the marble floors gleaming under crystal chandeliers, and felt her heart beat a steady rhythm of anticipation. Whatever happened next, Helen knew she was no longer defined by abandonment. She was defined by her courage, her love for Emily, and the knowledge that standing up for herself was the greatest victory of all. Helen Parker's heart thudded in her chest as she slipped into the ornately decorated ballroom, the warm glow of crystal chandeliers dancing off the polished marble floors. Rows of ivory-covered chairs flanked a long aisle strewn with white rose petals, and at the far end, Michael Grant stood beside his new bride, Serena Wallace, under a towering floral arch. From her vantage point in the back row, unobtrusive, yet fully present, Helen felt the room's collective anticipation humming like electricity. She reminded herself to breathe slowly, to steady her pulse. This evening wasn't about rekindling an old love. It was about witnessing the truth. As soft strains of a string quartet filled the air, Serena's attendants approached the microphone, preparing to begin the ceremony, but instead of an introduction to the vows, Serena paused, her gaze drifting beyond Michael to where Helen sat. A strained smile flickered across the bride's face, as though she were choosing her next words with the precision of a seasoned orator. Helen's throat tightened. She knew what was coming. "Before we continue," Serena began, her voice carrying clearly over the hush, "I need everyone to understand why we're here tonight." She glanced around, as though seeking affirmation from the 200 guests clad in tuxedos and evening gowns. "You see, I saved Michael from that broken woman." Laughter erupted, warm and approving, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Champagne glasses tinkled cheerfully as guests exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and triumph. Some nodded knowingly, as if Serena's quip were the punchline of a well-rehearsed joke. Others clinked their glasses in applause. Helen felt her cheeks burn not with shame, but with the simmering heat of old wounds exposed. Every painful memory she'd tried to bury rose up in that instant, the lonely nights spent comforting Michael. The morning she swallowed tears so Emily wouldn't see. The ache of his final parting words. Yet she remained motionless, settled into her seat like a statue carved from resolve. Emily, standing just inside the serving entrance in her catering uniform, caught Helen's eye and offered a small, steady nod, an unspoken promise of solidarity. The laughter subsided as Serena's sharp words hung in the air, and a sudden, brittle silence took hold. It was the kind of silence charged with expectation, where even the string quartet's music felt suspended mid-note. Helen inhaled deeply, the scent of white orchids and polished wood swirling around her like a mist. In that moment, she realized how far she'd come from a woman who once crumpled beneath the weight of heartbreak, to someone who could sit serenely in a room full of strangers and still hold her head high. The insult that had stung so deeply now felt deflated. like an empty husk of a memory she no longer feared. As the guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, Helen allowed herself a faint, knowing smile, one that spoke of resilience, dignity, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her daughter, and somewhere in that quiet triumph, she felt the first real sense of peace she had known in years. Helen Parker sat rigidly in her seat as the last notes of the string quartet faded, and Serena Wallace lifted her champagne flute for the first toast of the evening. The warm glow of crystal chandeliers ricocheted off every polished surface, but the atmosphere felt suddenly colder. A hush rippling through the 200 guests assembled beneath the lofty ceiling. Serena's eyes skimmed the crowd, finally settling on Helen, and a cruel smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "Before we continue," Serena began, voice clear and confident, "I think everyone should know why Michael and I are together." She paused, scanning for approval. "You see, I saved him from that broken woman." A ripple of laughter flooded the room, soft, approving, complicit. Glasses clinked, sympathetic heads nodded. Helen felt the sting of old wounds reopen every tear she'd swallowed, every sleepless night spent comforting Michael Grant after their devastating loss now seemed on display for strangers' amusement. Her hands clenched in her lap, but she stayed perfectly still, shoulders squared. Across the ballroom, Emily, now 6 feet tall in her crisp black and white server's uniform, paused mid-service. Tray balanced as if it were a shield. Helen's heart lurched at the sight of her daughter's tense silhouette. Time slowed as Emily removed her crisp white cap, placing it gently on the rim of a nearby table. No one spoke. The clinking halted. The laughter died. Serena's expression flickered between surprise and disdain, as though she couldn't quite believe this uninvited intrusion. With measured steps, Emily walked directly to the microphone stand beside the head table. The floral arch, once a symbol of romantic promise, loomed overhead like a gilded cage. Emily straightened her spine, her voice steady even though her chest rose and fell with the weight of unshed tears. "I'm Michael's daughter," she said, the words echoing against marble and gold. "And I have something to say." The room froze. Forks hovered midair. A waiter paused with a tray of hors d'oeuvres at chest level. Serena's jaw slackened, her pearl earrings swinging as she spun toward Emily. For a heartbeat, there was only silence, thick, electric, impossible to ignore. Then Emily spoke again, each syllable a measured step toward justice. "He left me and my mother without an explanation. He returned our letters unread. He vanished when I was only 11, leaving me to believe he no longer loved us." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Aunts clutched their pearls, uncles lowered their phones, uncertain whether to record or retreat. Helen watched Emily's face, proud and resolute, and felt a tidal wave of emotion she'd spent 6 years burying. This wasn't vengeance, it was truth made visible, with every word. Emily reclaimed the narrative Serena had tried to twist. My mother never broke him. She held him up when he couldn't stand on his own. She filled every empty room with laughter and hope. You didn't save him, you joined him after he walked away. Seated beside Helen, Uncle Jack straightened in his chair, his face pale but unwavering. Helen reached to squeeze Emily's hand, drawing strength from the fierce love that had guided them both through darkness. Emily turned her gaze to her mother for a brief moment, a soft smile curving her lips. Then she faced Serena again. "You can't build a life on lies," she said quietly but firmly. and you certainly can't humiliate the woman who taught you how to be honest. As Emily stepped back and retrieved her cap, a tremor of realization passed over Serena's features. The guests, no longer allies in mockery, began to murmur apologies. Some rose to their feet, not in applause for the bride, but in respect for the young woman who had spoken her truth. In that moment, Helen felt the ballroom transform. What had been a spectacle of cruelty became a testament to resilience, a reminder that real strength often appears in the quietest voices. And for the first time that night, Helen Parker allowed herself to believe that healing could start in even the grandest of halls. Emily's words cut through the hushed tension of the ballroom like a bell tolling clear, unwavering, and impossible to ignore. She stood before 200 guests, her crisp white server's cap held in her trembling hand, and faced the bride and groom with a courage that belied her 16 years. "He left me and my mother without a single word," Emily began, her voice steady though her throat quivered. "Our letters came back stamped, 'Return to sender.' He vanished the night I turned 11, and you, Serena Wallace, had the nerve to call my mother broken." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Forks paused midair, and the string quartet's second violinist faltered on a high note. Serena's expression drained of color, her poised composure cracking like fine china under pressure. Helen Parker felt her heart swell with fierce pride as Emily continued, recounting with measured clarity the nights her mother spent comforting a grieving man, the mornings she packed Emily's lunch while fighting back tears, and the years spent rebuilding their lives from the rubble of abandonment. "You didn't save him," Emily said, taking a small step forward. "You arrived after he'd already run. My mother never broke him. She held him up when he had nowhere else to turn. She loved him through his darkest hours, while you capitalized on his pain and turned it into a fairy tale." Her gaze swept the room, lingering on Michael Grant, whose taut, practiced smile had finally slipped. The applause that followed wasn't for Serena or for the wedding, but for the raw honesty of a daughter reclaiming her story. Helen Parker reached out and squeezed Emily's shoulder. In that shared touch, years of sorrow, resilience, and unwavering love coalesced into a single, triumphant moment. The guests began to murmur among themselves, some offering nods of apology to Helen, others turning away in awkward realization that they had been complicit in Serena's mockery. Even Uncle Jack, seated at the edge of the crowd, wiped a tear from his cheek. Emily replaced her cap and smiled softly at her mother. "You taught me to stand tall," she whispered, loud enough for Helen and Michael to hear. And as the ballroom's grand chandeliers glittered overhead, what had started as a staged humiliation transformed into a testament to truth, love, and the unbreakable bond between mother and daughter. Michael Grant's smile froze mid-toast, the crystal flute poised at his lips as his daughter's voice cut through the ambient hum of the reception. His practiced ease, so carefully cultivated over these past months, crumbled in an instant. For a heartbeat, he looked every bit the confident groom under the glow of the chandeliers. But then his eyes widened, the stiff facade melting into raw shock. His hand trembled slightly, sending a rivulet of champagne chime along the rim of the glass. He opened his mouth to speak, to reclaim control of the evening. But no words came. Instead, Michael's gaze locked onto Emily Parker, standing firm in her server's uniform, her cap clasped in one hand like a silent talisman. Behind him, Serena Wallace's laughter died on her lips. Moments before, she'd been the life of the party effervescent, self-assured, basking in the warmth of congratulatory applause. Now, confronted with Emily's quiet declaration, her composure shattered. The bride's cheeks drained of color, her painted smile faltered into a brittle, uncertain line. She clutched her glass with both hands, as if seeking support from the cool stem of the flute. Around her, guests shuffled awkwardly, unsure whether to comfort the bride or side with the young woman speaking unvarnished truth. Michael's shoulders sagged, the weight of unspoken guilt pressing down on him. He glanced at Serena, searching for her familiar smirk, but found only panic in her eyes. In that moment, the two of them, once so meticulously in sync, seemed estranged, each betrayed by the other's silence. Michael shifted his stance, turning slowly back toward Emily, but the hush in the room was suffocating. No warm encouragement followed Emily's words, only silence, heavy and expectant. Serena's breath caught audibly. She brought a shaky hand to her throat, as if to swallow back the stinging clarity of the accusation. Her manicured fingers tightened around the glass, leaving pale indentations on the gold rim. She had thought herself the savior in Michael's narrative, the one who rescued him from his past, uplifted him from despair. But now, standing face to face with the daughter he abandoned, Serena realized how hollow her triumph had become. Michael cleared his throat, voice barely above a whisper. "Emily, He paused, his eyes darting between his bride and his child. Each second stretched into an eternity as he searched for an apology that might bridge years of silence. Serena followed his gaze, her own expression softening for just a flicker regret. Perhaps, or the first glimmer of shame. But the promise of a graceful excuse dissolved in her throat, and she looked away, her shoulders hunching as if to hide from the weight of expectation. In the tense stillness, Uncle Jack rose quietly from the back row and slipped forward, placing a steady hand on Helen Parker's arm. The gesture was a subtle reminder that support existed beyond the fractured couple at the altar. Michael lowered his head, swallowing hard, as the room exhaled collectively. Serena let her flute's contents slosh gently back and forth, her gaze fixed on the pristine white orchids lining the aisle. For the first time that evening, Michael Grant appeared undeniably vulnerable, an ordinary man stripped of pretense, confronted by the daughter he left behind, and Serena Wallace, confronted with the truth she'd so carelessly weaponized, stood diminished in her own celebration. The orchestrated perfection of their wedding faded, leaving only an unvarnished tableau of accountability and the quiet triumph of a daughter's voice. Helen Parker and her daughter Emily slipped away from the echoing clink of glasses and the whispering swirl of gossip, stepping into the cool, damp night as though crossing an invisible threshold into a new life. The grand chandeliers of the Ridgewood Grand Hotel faded behind them, replaced by the gentle patter of early evening rain against the pavement. Helen felt an unexpected lightness in her chest, an unfamiliar relief that replaced the familiar ache of abandonment. For the first time in 6 years, she realized she no longer carried the weight of Michael Grant's departure. He had erased her from his story, but tonight she had reclaimed her narrative. Emily, her weather-beaten server's cap tucked under one arm, offered her mother a small, triumphant smile. Helen reached out, entwining her fingers with Emily's, and together they moved down the hotel steps, each footstep a declaration of their resilience. The drizzle soaked Emily's dark hair, loosening the curls she normally kept pinned neatly in place a visible symbol of the release both mother and daughter felt. Helen paused, closing her eyes to let the cool drops wash away years of sorrow, and when she opened them again, the streetlight haloed around Emily's silhouette, making her look almost ethereal. They walked in companionable silence until Helen whispered, "Are you okay?" Emily nodded, her smile widening. "I feel alive," she said softly, for the first time. "I'm not just the shadow of someone else's story." Helen drew in a steadying breath. The night air tasted like possibility, like the moment after a storm when the world smells fresh and new. In that instant, she understood that Michael's wedding had not been a trap, but a turning point, a catalyst that forced them both out of hiding and into the light of their own strength. Uncle Jack's car was parked under a canopy of rain-glossed leaves. He had waited patiently, offering neither pity nor congratulations. Only the unwavering presence that had guided Helen through so many difficult years. As they slid into the back seat, Helen caught her reflection in the window. Her shoulders were straight, her eyes clear. Gone was the haunted look of a woman broken by loss. In its place stood someone rebuilt by love and perseverance. Beside her, Emily settled against the seat, her face aglow with something more radiant than any chandelier could produce. "Mom," Emily said, her hand finding Helen's once more. "Thank you for coming tonight." Helen squeezed her hand. "No," she corrected, voice steady. "Thank you for showing me I belong to this world, to my own story." Emily's smile deepened, and for a moment, mother and daughter sat in perfect harmony, two survivors breathing together in the quiet aftermath of confrontation. As Uncle Jack started the engine, Helen gazed out at the dark street, the rain-slick pavement reflecting the soft glow of lampposts. This night would become one of her most vivid memories, not for the sting of Serena's barbs, but for the moment she chose herself and her daughter over every broken promise. In the hushed sanctuary of the car, with Emily's hand in hers and Uncle Jack's steady presence beside them, Helen Parker finally felt what she'd been searching for all those years, the unshakable knowledge that she could face anything, so long as she faced it with love and unwavering courage. The morning after the wedding felt strangely quiet to Helen Parker. The Ridgewood Grand's glittering chandeliers and polished marble floors were replaced in her memory by the soft hum of her laptop and the gentle tapping of rain against her home office window. Overnight. A short, grainy video of Emily's courageous speech had exploded across social media. The clip Emily removing her server's cap and declaring, "I'm his daughter, and I have something to say," had been viewed millions of times, shared by women who recognized their own stories in hers. Helen watched the play count climb, marveling at the unexpected reach of a moment she had once feared would remain a private act of defiance. Comments poured in from across the country. "Thank you for speaking truth. I saw my mother in you. You've given me the courage to tell my own story." Many were from older women, some in their 70s, 80s, or even 90s, who had spent decades in silence. Their messages arrived as emails, private messages, and handwritten letters sent to Helen's mailing address, praising Emily's bravery and thanking Helen for raising such a fierce daughter. In the days that followed, Helen found herself drawn back to the blank document on her screen. She had once loved to write short essays, reflections on motherhood, occasional freelance pieces for small magazines, but grief and self-doubt had silenced that part of her. Now. She opened a new file and began typing. At first, the words were halting a description of that gilded ballroom, the sting of Serena's insult, the tremor in Emily's voice. But as the narrative unfolded, Helen felt something shift within her, a rekindled sense of purpose. Within a week, Standing Tall went live, a simple blog where Helen recounted her story in full, the unexpected invitation, the years she spent rebuilding her life after abandonment, Emily's role as both inspiration and guardian. She ended each post with a question or prompt encouraging readers to share their own experiences of loss, resilience, or forgiveness. To her surprise, the comment section filled with stories from women across America, a grandmother in Texas who lost her husband of 50 years, a retiree in Michigan healing from divorce, a great-grandmother in Florida who had once felt discarded by her family. Spurred by this outpouring, Helen organized a virtual support circle, inviting readers to join weekly video calls. Initially, only a handful of women logged in, some using landline conference lines because they weren't comfortable with video. Over the next month, the group grew to 50 regular participants, many in the 65-plus bracket, each sharing wisdom gleaned through decades of hardship. They discussed coping strategies for loneliness, practical tips for managing household budgets on Social Security income, and ways to rebuild social networks after family breakdowns. Encouraged by the success of these circles, Helen registered a nonprofit under the name The Second Thread, the organization's mission to offer both online and, where possible, in-person healing circles, mentorship programs pairing younger and older women, and writing workshops that helped participants craft and share their own narratives. With seed funding from a small grant and donations from grateful readers, The Second Thread began hosting local gatherings at community centers in Helen's hometown. At 68, Helen could hardly have imagined stepping into the role of nonprofit founder. Yet each time she listened to a woman's tears give way to laughter in a circle, she felt the same surge of hope she'd experienced when Emily first spoke her truth. She mailed welcome packets containing writing prompts and packets of herbal tea to new members, hosted monthly guest speakers, therapists, social workers, retired journalists, and even arranged transportation for senior participants who lacked reliable transit. Looking back, Helen realized that what began as a viral clip had blossomed into a movement. The very thing Serena Wallace had intended as humiliation had become the catalyst for healing thousands of women who believed they were forgotten. In her own quiet home office, surrounded by letters and mugs of chamomile tea, Helen Parker finally understood that survival wasn't just about enduring, it was about transforming pain into purpose. Thread by thread, toward a tapestry of shared strength and renewal. Helen Parker's journey from heartache to hope is a testament to the unbreakable bond between a mother and her daughter. When Michael vanished in the night, leaving Helen to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, it was young Emily Parker, barely 10 years old, who became her anchor. Every morning, Helen braided Emily's hair, packed her lunch, and helped with spelling tests, even while her own heart felt like concrete. It was Emily's quiet strength offering peanut butter sandwiches on tear-soaked bathroom floors that reminded Helen she wasn't alone. Over 2 years of therapy, freelance design work, and small apartment moves closer to Emily's school, the pair rebuilt their lives piece by piece. Helen rediscovered her laughter. Emily blossomed into a compassionate teenager wise beyond her years. Their shared resilience became a living lesson, true. Healing often happens in the everyday acts of kindness, the bedtime stories, the homemade apple pies, the late-night talks about fears and dreams. Today, Helen and Emily stand together as proof that love isn't measured by perfect circumstances, but by the willingness to stay, to support one another, and to believe in a future beyond pain. If you've ever leaned on someone's strength or offered your own in return, you know that these simple acts can spark profound healing. Join the conversation. Tell us about a moment when someone's love helped you overcome a tough time. If this spoke to your heart, give this video a like. Subscribe for more true stories of resilience, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode.